Thanks, everybody, for coming. We're going to make this a filibuster-free zone. Chairman Leahy has got to leave in just a few minutes to work out the end-of-the-year spending agreement, where he is doing a lot of very good work. So we'll all just talk for maybe 3 minutes or so, and then we want our privacy friends, our wonderful watchdogs, to speak as well. All of us are here on a bipartisan basis to make it clear that we support the government's effort to target foreign threats overseas. We simply don't want to see Americans be part of an end run on the Constitution here at home. That's what unifies our group, and we want to make sure that there is not an effort in the Congress to short-circuit a real debate on this critical question. The fact is, the Senate has gone a whole year without a minute of debate, not a single minute on the floor or in an open markup. So you ask, what is the government hiding? Why is it talking about vast unchecked surveillance without some discussion about what it means for the public? And I'll close by saying that the administration is actually going backward on transparency. It won't provide an estimate on the number of Americans swept up under the program. That is a 180-degree turnabout from the government's position as recently as May. I'd also like to note that the government has refused to answer the question that Senator Lee and I have been interested in, which is, what are the general categories of people being targeted under Section 702? So when the government won't answer the most basic questions, the Congress is forced to legislate in the dark. And to see how far-fetched this has become, it has not even been possible to get a straight answer on whether a law called the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act can be used to collect communications that the government knows are entirely domestic. So that's just a little bit of an example of how extreme the government's positions are. Senator Paul will go next. Chairman Leahy, we'll just all zip through a few minutes and take questions.
Intelligence community here in our country needs more oversight, not less. I think permanent reauthorization of the FISA Act, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, would be less oversight and would be a huge mistake. So I absolutely oppose permanent reauthorization. Any reauthorization needs to be short, and we need more oversight, not less. Our intelligence community has the capability to listen to every phone call in the world, including Americans. We have the ability to see every email and read every bit of metadata concerning phone calls and emails. Our intelligence community also has the capability of looking at every internet search. There needs to be more oversight, not less. We allow our government to collect things on foreigners with a less than constitutional standard. You don't have to name the person. You don't have to have probable cause. You don't have to say what items you're looking for. We have basically carte blanche on foreigners. Any American data caught up on that needs to be protected by the Constitution, and really any data collected at a less than constitutional standard should not be used for domestic prosecution. Senator Wyden and I and others, Senator Leahy, Lee, Daines, we all have ideas on reform. This is incredibly important, and there ought to be debate on it, but I think we are unified in saying no permanent reauthorization. Anything should be short-term reauthorization, and there needs to be a full-throated debate on reforming, controlling, and overseeing this enormous power we allow our intelligence community to have. Senator Leahy.
Senator Paul.
Like they said, and I agree, you know, this, you look at the group here, we go across the political spectrum, both parties. In a way, this is like what we would see in the state of Vermont, an agreement that our privacy is extremely important. We know other countries spy on us, but we shouldn't have our own country spying on us. As innocent Americans, we ought to have a sense of privacy. 702 was intended to be a powerful foreign intelligence surveillance tool, and it is. but remember, it sweeps up massive amounts of Americans' communications. So if we reauthorize 702, which we should do it only with real privacy reforms. We have bipartisan consensus, but as Senator Wyden and Senator Paul has said, we have to have a real debate. We should codify it into what's called a bouts collection. We should address the backdoor search loophole. We should have increased transparency measures. So this is too important an issue to jam through on a year-end continuing resolution. We can have a short-term continuing resolution, we can keep the government going, but then in the first couple of weeks of January, have plenty of time. We've had a whole year to debate this. Let's take the time to debate it. The House Judiciary Committee reported a bipartisan bill, 27-8. Senator Lee and I are working together with the leaders of them, just as we did in USA Freedom. So I understand we preach to the converted in the public. They ought to listen to what we hear back home. Protect our privacy. People worry about their privacy being invaded all the time. Other countries invade our privacy. Our own country should not do it. Let us have a real debate on the Senate floor, and let us get a consensus bill that can pass. Thank you. And I think
Thanks. Thank you. It's clear that extremist groups and other like-minded terrorists, their intent on destroying our very way of life, including our nation's foundation of freedom and justice for all. But even as we strengthen our intelligence capabilities, we must, with equal vigor and equal determination, protect our Constitution, protect our civil liberties, because, after all, that is the very foundation of our country. And we can do both without sacrificing the other, but it requires careful consideration and robust debate. That's why we're here today. Because if the forces of evil successfully propel our leaders here in Washington to erode these core constitutional values, we will grant these terrorists a satisfying victory. That's why it's critical that our law enforcement, first of all, has the tools they need to protect our national security from extremists who wish to destroy our nation and our very way of life. But we must remain vigilant to ensure that Americans' civil liberties aren't needlessly abandoned in that process. That's why we must carefully and thoughtfully evaluate programs like Section 702, which allows the government strong powers to monitor certain conversations without warrant. And without careful oversight and accountability, power of this magnitude, and history shows that, is too easily abused.
Thank you, Steve. Senator Lee.
Made me happy a moment ago when I realized I was standing to the left of my friend Senator Leahy while simultaneously standing to the right of my friend Senator Paul. That's hard to do. The fact that we have this array of political representation along the spectrum shows that this is one of these issues that is neither Democratic nor Republican, nor neither liberal nor conservative. This is simply an American issue. This is a constitutional issue. This is about the security and the privacy of the American people. Too many people for too long have been asked to settle. They've been asked to settle on their privacy with the promise of security. But we have to remember, our privacy and our security are not inextricably, unavoidably at odds with each other. In fact, our privacy is itself part of our security. We are not truly secure unless our privacy is respected. And our Constitution itself, along with hundreds of years of Anglo-American legal tradition, back us up on this very point. What we know is that good people sometimes do bad things. We don't have access to angels to govern over us, so our governments must be run by human beings. Human beings, while redeemable, are flawed, and sooner or later they will make mistakes. When we look at the brave men and women who work for us in our armed forces and those who run our security, our surveillance, our intelligence gathering agencies, they're good people. I suspect overwhelmingly they want to do good for our country, but sooner or later someone will make mistakes. And bad things happen when those mistakes are made, when we don't make sure that we safeguard the privacy of the American people. Government can misuse these powers, and government databases can themselves be hacked, thus further endangering not only our privacy, but also our security, recognizing that they're part of a cohesive whole. These are some of the reasons why I've worked closely together with Senator Leahy to introduce the USA Liberty Act, something that has passed out of the House Judiciary Committee with an overwhelming bipartisan supermajority vote. It's something that needs to pass. It's something that needs to rein in the use of Section 702 for things like backdoor searches. When the government's listening to just about everything, when it collects and has the power to read just about everything, if all it has to do is go back and search for an American citizen, that is a functional end run around the Fourth Amendment and all that we hold dear within constitutional government. At a bare minimum, we've got to make sure that something as important and as potentially dangerous as reauthorization of Section 702 doesn't get crammed in to something else, doesn't get laid down as the condition precedent for avoiding a government shutdown. So if you've got to do it for a few days or a few weeks or something like that, that's one thing. But it is absolutely unacceptable to jam a full, permanent reauthorization of Section 702 in with the spending bill. Thank you.
Senator Lee, thank you. Let's do this. We've got some wonderful privacy watchdogs who've helped us with this. The ACLU, Freedom Works, Demand Progress. I'd like, if they'll indulge us, these are some busy senators, me notwithstanding, but they ought to, if any of you have questions, they'll be able to stay for a few more minutes, and then I'm going to stay for all our wonderful advocates. Do any of you press folks have questions, particularly for my four colleagues? Yes.
Just to follow up on that, when you were saying that you would support something in extension for a few days or a couple weeks, is that what's being considered, or is there talk that there might be a permanent extension attached to the CR?
Senator Lee, I think you were the one who touched on a few days and his view.
I'm not sure what would happen, and I'm not saying I'm thrilled or would be enthusiastic about even a short-term extension. What I am saying would be completely unacceptable is a full, a long-term or permanent reauthorization of Section 702. Like, this is fundamental to our liberty, and to cram this in with a spending bill without adequate opportunity for debate or discussion would not be appropriate.
I think Chairman Leahy is obviously key on this debate.
As Vice Chairman of the Appropriations Committee, I've been in all the debates. There's a growing consensus, Republicans and Democrats, that you cannot have a permanent extension of 702 without without reforms. A couple of weeks, probably live with that, but not a permanent one. And to, just as Mike Lee and I face the efforts to jam something on the last day, we resisted it, got a bipartisan coalition to resist it. I think people learn from that. We end up with better legislation as a result. We will here too.
And as you know, there's a bipartisan coalition in the House saying almost the same thing that you have heard my colleagues say. Yeah. What I can tell you is, based on what I know now, there may be several reasons why I would vote against a spending bill. I've been concerned about the health provisions. I've been concerned about a whole host of issues relating to children's health and the question of the young people, the dreamers, and others. So I've made it clear there may be a number of reasons why I vote against the bill. What is unifying to our group here, and it is very much like what was said in the House, we think it would be a horrible mistake to not have an open debate on what is described as the intelligence community's #1 priority. There has not been a moment of open debate in the United States Senate on an issue where you have an agreement with respect to going after foreign threats. But we also feel strongly that you shouldn't be able to end run the Constitution. So I'll let my colleagues pick up on that, but that's what brings us together. We think this issue is too important for the Congress to duck a real debate.
And I would just say, absolutely, I will vote against any spending bill that has permanent reauthorization.
Senator Bolton, the days are ticking away. There aren't very many left before it expires. You forced Section 215 to expire using, I believe it was a 30-hour requirements for closure. Have you considered doing that to force expiration of this provision?
I'm not sure I know the answer to it. So there are specific requirements on debate with the expiration of 702? Is that what you're saying?
I believe it was a procedural motion requiring like 30 hours a day before it's supposed to close unless if there wasn't an infection. I believe how you did it last time.
I will say this. I usually don't make a practice of signaling in advance what procedural tactics I might deploy in any given circumstance, but it is significant that we passed a major reform in the area of bulk metadata collection with the scheduled expiration of Section 215 of the Patriot Act, and I think that's what you're referring to. So anytime some authority like that is empowering, in that case, the expiration of the bulk metadata collection program, in this case, it's Section 702. It gives Congress the opportunity to bring about change. And as that clock ticks, the default starts to turn against the government. Whereas without the expiration of that kind of authority, the default remains with the government. The government, having once acquired that power, just holds on to it in perpetuity.
There's one other fact that relates to this, and I'm surprised Byron knows about this since the Journal broke the development. The government, through the Director of National Intelligence, has actually said on the public record, their words, not mine, that it is very clear that the government's authority does not expire at the end of the year. Pardon me? I thought that was you guys. All right. Give credit to all. But I think the point really is, having been involved along with my colleagues in this for a number of years, I was struck by the government's public statement on an issue that I'm not sure they really saw the ramifications for this debate. Because what it means is that the old argument, and the three of us have seen this movie before, you wait until the last minute. We know it is a dangerous world. We know that there's a crowded congressional calendar, and so everybody says, my goodness, we've just got to go ahead and pass this again because we don't want our country to be defenseless. And the fact is now we have in open source material the head of national intelligence saying, in his words, that it's very clear that their authority doesn't expire at the end of the year. So I think that impacts your question, too. Yeah.
Talk about short-term reauthorization. What would that actually look like? Are you thinking a couple weeks? Are you thinking 4 months until that April deadline? What does the short-term
I'm not sure what it would look like, and I haven't drawn any definitive line there, but I think it would be something that should be expressed in terms of weeks, certainly not years, and something that ideally would decouple this from the spending bill universe, as long as it remains bound up with continuing resolutions or appropriations measures. I think that creates an undue opportunity for reflexive reauthorization without any reforms. Yeah.
What I'll tell you is, to me, the measuring rod here is, will there be a public debate on the key issues? We want to know how many law-abiding Americans are swept up in these searches. We want to know about what's called abouts collection, where essentially someone is caught up in this just because they are mentioned somewhere. The issues Senator Lee and I have worked on, we can't even get a straight answer. What are the general categories of people who are targeted under Section 702? We can't get a straight answer with respect to domestic collection. So I think you'll find, in terms of those of us who are part of what Senator Paul and I have called the Ben Franklin caucus, anybody who gives up their liberty to have security doesn't deserve either. The focus is really on getting these major questions into the public domain so that people can have a sense of exactly what is at issue. And all of those questions I just mentioned can be discussed without compromising what are called sources and methods, the specifics of protecting our brave men and women who work in the field.
And I'd like to just make one comment on that, and this is a part of our reform, and I mentioned it before. The information that's collected on foreigners is collected with a less than constitutional standard. The Fourth Amendment we do not use with collecting information, and most of us are kind of okay with that. We don't want information collected below the Constitution, though, to be used for domestic crime. You should have to use the Constitution for Americans here in this country. This is a big deal to me, and it's why not only just should there be limits on searching this data for Americans, since it's been collected at a less than constitutional standard, it should not be used for domestic crime. Terrorism, maybe, national security, but it should not be used for any other domestic crime because it's been collected at a less than constitutional standard. And for me, that's a big item of reform.
Why don't we take one more, and we'll take you two because you had hands up, and let's get our friends, our wonderful privacy watchdogs up too. Steve.
Yeah, that is certainly what I would like, and more importantly, I think that's what the American people would expect with something as significant as this, something that deals with the privacy and the security of the American people in the way that this does. I would think they would expect us to deal with it that way, rather than to have this shoved in with a whole bunch of other issues having nothing to do with this subject matter. I would think the American people would be understandably, justifiably frustrated with us if we did it that way. Yeah. Well, it's not before the end of the year, and that's why we're talking about the possibility of some sort of short-term measure that could decouple this from the continuing resolution.
Last one, yeah.
The only thing more secret than FISA is the leadership's discussion on what they would do with FISA.
And that's why it's so helpful to have Chairman Leahy in these discussions, because he obviously is the senior Democrat on the Appropriations Committee, is a great voice for us internally. Let's bring our friends up. I don't know if my colleagues can stick around, but we'll have a chance to have some more questions too. Why don't we have all of you, our big thanks. Okay, great.
Hi, everybody. I've met some of you. My name is Nima Singhaliani. I'm a legislative counsel with the ACLU, and we're happy to join the senators you saw here today to, I think, advocate for what you've seen is a bipartisan sense that there needs to be reform of our surveillance laws. If we've learned anything over the last decade, it's that surveillance laws shouldn't be made in secret. They shouldn't be the result of backroom deals that are hastily drafted. They shouldn't be rushed through Congress under unnecessary deadlines. And that is exactly the threat that's looming today. This is the first time that Congress is being asked to examine Section 702 since the revelations in 2013 revealed, in part, how it was being used. This is the first time members of Congress are being asked, should this law be reformed, or should it be allowed to sunset altogether? And given the importance of this issue, it's one we feel shouldn't be tacked onto a CR. It's not one that should be hidden from public scrutiny. It's one that, as Senator Wyden and the other members you saw here today said, should be openly debated and where real reform needs to happen. We've learned a lot about this program since 2013, and we've gotten a sense of how it has been used and abused. So what have we learned? We've learned that although the government says this is a law about foreigners, it results in massive amounts of Americans' information being collected. Estimates from some outlets who've analyzed intercepted communications estimate that roughly half of the information collected under Section 702 involves information about a U.S. resident. 9 out of 10 of files examined contain information about people who aren't even targets of surveillance. That's very critical. We've also learned that although the government, again, says that this is authority that is used to target foreigners, it is routinely used to search for information about Americans. The FBI searches through Section 702 databases in cases that have nothing to do with national security, looking for information about Americans as an end run around the Fourth Amendment. And finally, we now know that the government has interpreted Section 702 to allow it to collect purely domestic communications that are not to or from a target. They may be merely about a target. These are very serious concerns that have been expressed by the members, by the privacy and civil liberties community. They have significant constitutional implications and real-life effects on people who may be prosecuted and may have other actions taken against them. And it's critical that we actually debate them and that we see that the American people have the opportunity to weigh in on real reform to this law. Given all this, it's concerning to us that some of the bills being considered as part of the expiration of 702 are not reform at all. And they're actually bills that would expand surveillance and are simply masquerading as reform. There's the Senate intelligence bill that was marked up in a closed session. In our estimation, that bill does not put in place real reforms to 702 and actually makes the law worse. There's a House intelligence bill that was released less than 48 hours before it was marked up in committee, leaving staff and the public scrambling to even understand what that bill meant. Again, that's a bill that would expand surveillance under 702 and other authorities. Both of these approaches should be rejected, and they should be real reform measures that are voted on in the Senate and the House and debated fully. Reform measures that you've seen from the members today that would close the backdoor search loophole, prevent the collection of domestic communication, increase oversight, increase transparency. So again, we don't believe that surveillance laws should be made in secret as part of a rushed process. So we're calling on Congress to listen to the public and have a full debate on 702 and pass reforms.
Right. Let's hear from Freedom Works and Demand Progress. Take a few more questions, and I got to go off to deal with that tax issue.
Thank you, Senator Wyden. My name is Jason Pye. I'm the Vice President of Legislative Affairs for Freedom Works. Look, we all knew going into this year that FISA was going to be on the agenda. It wasn't a surprise to anyone. In fact, my team and I joined with Demand Progress and the ACLU for a number of meetings this year, going back to as late as late spring. The different versions, the House Intel and Senate Intel versions of FISA reauthorization are beyond bad. Nima's absolutely right. But regardless of the merits or drawbacks of each approach, one thing is, it must be clear, any long-term reauthorization cannot be attached to a CR. This debate on this issue needs to be out in the public for public consumption, because FISA and 702 have such a great impact on our constitutional liberty. Unfortunately, the Fourth Amendment has not mattered so much in the past. FreedomWorks put out something earlier this year on our principles for FISA reauthorization. We called for the codification to the end of about collection, the closure of the backdoor loophole, as well as a sunset of any FISA reauthorizations. A lot of the things we're hearing this year have not backed that up, especially in recent weeks. So from our perspective, a short-term reauthorization, straight reauthorization of FISA, as Senator Lee said, for weeks is much preferable to sticking it on for a long-term reauthorization or permanent reauthorization. We need to have a debate. It needs to be out in the open. We need to have the proper process here so senators and House members can debate this, and let's actually let the public see who is standing against our Fourth Amendment liberties, these crucial liberties that we want to continue to protect. So I'll turn it over to Dan from Demand Progress.
Big thanks to FreedomWorks for being part of this coalition. Very much appreciated. Let's hear from our good folks at Demand Progress.
Hi, good morning. I'm Daniel Schumann, Policy Director with Demand Progress. We are a progressive organization with 2.5 million members, and we stand side by side with FreedomWorks, with the ACLU, and with almost 50 other organizations in saying two things and two things only. One, right now, this is not the time to jam through this legislation. It deserves a real debate in the Senate. Two, any legislation that is enacted needs to be real reform legislation. And we've very clearly articulated with our allies and with our friends what this means. We've talked about closing the backdoor search loophole. We've talked about addressing abouts collection. It doesn't matter whether you are progressive or conservative or liberal or libertarian. Civil society as a whole has spoken out and says that the approach that's been taken in HPSI and in SISI is not the approach that we support, nor do we support being jammed in this process. And we anticipated this, right? We've been expecting this for a long time, that we would come down to the wire and that there'd be some sort of an effort to create some sort of a circumstance where we'd have no choice but to have our friends in the Senate take a tough vote. And the truth is, this is the kind of thing that deserves to be given its own debate. We saw the House process that didn't follow House rules, the Senate process in SISI, they didn't follow Senate rules either. There's something wrong when you have a secret bill being debated in secret that affects all of us, whether journalists, civil society, ordinary Americans, or even the folks that lead us. So with that, I know that we're happy to...
Let's do this. I may leave my three wonderful privacy watchdogs to take some questions. Anybody have anything else they need from me? Okay. Folks, can you stay for a few more minutes and talk to people?
Thank you so much.
Good.
Questions?
Could you outline what your objections are to the Senate and House Intelligence version of the bill?
Sure. Do you want to start?
Sure. So there's a couple of key issues and ways where we feel the bill actually makes the status quo worse. In the House Intelligence bill, there's a provision that would actually expand surveillance under FISA. Under FISA, there's the ability for the government to target people that are considered, in the words of the legislation, foreign powers and agents of a foreign power. The bill would actually expand that definition to allow surveillance of individuals who are not associated with foreign actors, not members of terrorist organizations, et cetera. We see that as a step back from current law. There's language in the bill that we're concerned would be seen as Congress codifying about collection instead of reforming it. There's also language in both of those bills that we're concerned could be used by the government to allow bulk collection under 702, targeting of entire places, targeting of entire premises. And finally, neither of those bills really closes the backdoor search loophole. Neither of those bills puts in place a warrant requirement for when the government wants to search through Section 702 for information about Americans. Instead, we're concerned that the language in the bill actually codifies that practice without real reforms. So those are some of our high-level concerns, in addition to sort of lack of effective oversight and transparency of the program.
I would say, just from the perspective of abouts collection, this is something that the FISC slapped the NSA for. I can't remember the exact quote, but it basically said it was a very serious violation of the Fourth Amendment, paraphrasing. And they also knocked the NSA for an institutional lack of candor. So we're talking about something that's potentially, that has very severe Fourth Amendment ramifications, and yet the HPSI and SISI bills basically provide a pathway for it to continue. That's something that every American should oppose if you believe in the Fourth Amendment.
Other questions? Okay, can I just one? So just one more thing that's worth adding. So when we talked about getting the American people involved in this conversation, I didn't get specific enough. So we have had through a progressive website 175,000 direct communications to Congress. We know that our friends on the right have had a lot more. We know that our civil liberties friends have had many more now. There are hundreds of thousands of people contacting Congress, including, I think, half a dozen organizations today pushing phone calls to Congress right now. So our members of Congress are hearing from us. And what we are telling them is we need a real debate on 702. That is the standard that must be met, and it is not the standard that is being proposed at the moment.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you so much.